Yeah, thank you very much, Xiaowen. And I'd like to also emphasize a very warm welcome to everybody. Another really great turnout on a drizzly Saturday night, so this is fantastic. It shows that there's obviously a critical mass here in Penang for this kind of forum. Let me just start by giving a couple of housekeeping notices. We're slowly building up the momentum of the forum, and I'm very pleased to say that our next speaker, which will be on the 25th of this month, 25th of September, will be Dr. Khairuddin Al-Junid from NUS Singapore, although he's a Penang boy, because he's just published a fantastically good new book called The Radicals, which looks at the whole history of the Malayan left in the period after the Second World War, and we're really pleased that I press-ganged Arifin Omar to be the discussant. And some of you were here when Arifin did his own forum talk about 6 weeks ago. So that's for September the 25th. And then in early October, I'm equally pleased that an old friend of mine, Azmi Sharon, will be coming up to do the Nusantara Forum. He wants Cecil Rajendra to be his discussant, so there should be some fireworks. But as you know, Azmi made the news earlier this year because although served with a notice under the Sedition Act, he's actually challenging the legal basis of the Sedition Act. So that'll be an interesting forum, and he's also got a new book of his collected essays out. He did just drop me an email a couple of hours ago because a little personal anecdote, he's a Tottenham Hotspur supporter, and because I used to teach and live in Manchester for many years, so for my sins, I'm a Manchester City supporter. So he said Najib is following the Manchester City model of financing the club. You find a rich Arab benefactor to give you donations. So I did point out that Tottenham Hotspur is owned by the world's second biggest foreign exchange speculator, so it doesn't really give him the moral high ground. Anyway, enough of that. So there's a couple of forums to come up, and I've also been in touch with Kwasung and Munro Kwa, and they're going to come and do a double act for us, reflecting back on Anne's book, which I actually reread in advance of today's forum, on authoritarian populism, written almost 20 years ago, and yet it still has a lot of resonance, I think, for the kind of politics that we're seeing at the moment. So a very warm welcome. And we're very pleased to welcome two, I think, wonderful speakers. I hadn't ever met face-to-face Ying Hooi before tonight, but when her book came into the bookshop a couple of months ago, I decided in a lazy moment to pick it up, and I took it home, and I put my hand on my heart. I read it in one sitting. There you go, and I was very taken by it. I think on that basis, I made moves to get in contact with her. And she kindly agreed to come and talk to the issues that are obviously very topical and very pertinent to the day. She teaches at University of Malaya. She did her doctoral thesis looking at social movements, politics of dissent and opposition, and of course that will be the main focus of what she has to talk about tonight, but necessarily, I guess, given that Bersih was just a weekend ago, and they were both at the Bersih rally, and there are quite a few people in the room who are also there. Perhaps that could be an illustrative point of entry into talking about some of the bigger issues in relationship to what Ying Hooi calls in her book the seeds of dissent. And on my immediate left, the sorcerer of Bukit Mertajam. The sorcerer of Bukit Mertajam. Now, any MP who turns up to a public forum, a respectable public forum like this, wearing a t-shirt like this, deserves everything he's going to get. Now, this fellow, worse. It's quite fantastic. We get a lot of support. We have a lot of great, wonderful, loyal customers who come into the shop, who've allowed us to survive over the last 15 or 16 months. But this fellow, when he walks in the shop, he claims that he comes under some kind of spell. Reminds me of the famous Nina Simone song, you know, you put a spell on me, 'cause you're mine. And he always leaves the shop about 500 ringgit poorer. So he told me before the talk that his wife is suing him for, not for divorce of course, for separate bank accounts. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to invite you also here tonight, Stephen, and thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Ying Hooi. You're going to speak for, what, 35, 40 minutes? Something like that? 30 minutes. We get Stephen to do some response, but as you know with how the forums work, what we really want is some kind of great interaction and contributions from the floor. So please give a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Khoo Ying Hooi.
Thank you, Garrett, for the wonderful introduction. I'm actually very much overwhelmed with the great turnout today. So that's why I decided to speak for just 30 minutes because I will expect a lot of responses from the crowd itself. So before I start, firstly I would like to thank to the Grab Raya and also Penang Institute, and of course to Stephen for agreeing to share the panel with me. I will just briefly introduce myself. As Garrett mentioned, I'm now attached with the University of Malaya, and my PhD thesis that I just completed not too long ago was actually on social movements and democratizations. And the very interesting is that when I started the topic, initially I was actually wanted to do something just on civil society. I was thinking, I was cracking my head, what should I write about civil society in Malaysia? It doesn't seem so exciting, you know, because like everybody say, oh, civil society is so small and things like that. I was thinking, then I researched more and I was thinking, okay, how about I just write about social movement, especially to analyze the protest strategies. So I thought of Bersih. Actually, the Bersih movement is the core case that I'm using in my PhD thesis. But during the process of the 3 years, every time each person who comes to me and asks, what is your PhD thesis about? I would say it's about social movement and basically I focus on Bersih. People will say, oh, are you allowed to actually write about Bersih? So I got that kind of question. I was like, why I can't write about Bersih movement? They say, but it is very sensitive. So from there you can see that generally the mindset of the Malaysian is that the state is repressive. That's why you cannot write about it. So I got that kind of question a lot. So of course during the process of writing it, I'm also contributing to the Malaysian Insider, the online news portal, in a weekly basis. So that's where I focus even more on writing, giving my opinions about the protest, because it seems to become like quite a norm for all the Malaysians. It's no longer exclusive. Yeah. So that's where the book, I put the title as Seeds of Dissent, and I think it worked out so well that I was supposed to speak last week actually. I wanted to speak in August, but it didn't work out because I booked it a bit late. So, but then I was lucky because the Bersih happened just last week. So the topics became even more relative. And the one thing is, if you can remember the 5 demands of the Bersih 4, one of it is actually right to dissent. So I was thinking, okay, my friend who went to the Bersih with me said that we should actually sell your book during the protest, because it's like basically you're writing for the Bersih, right to dissent. I was actually finding it quite interesting that they actually put right to dissent as one of the demands. How they want to define it, that will be quite debatable. Okay. So for my talk today, I'm going to focus on three main keywords to generally focus on the Bersih movement, from repression, dissent, and opportunities. I'll talk about the opportunities later on, but I'll link with the repression and the dissent. Briefly, I think most of you would know that I'm going to just focus on the contemporary protest trends. Yeah. So basically, I focus even in my books is basically from the protests in by Bersih back in 2007. But some, of course, they argue that why did you use the Bersih? It should be hinder. You know, hinder happened just a few days after the Bersih. Why are you not focusing on hinder? The argument is simple. Bersih is cross multiracial, but hinder is for just the Indians. So that's where my arguments came from. And another thing is that Bersih managed to sustain itself. They started back in actually 2005, so now it's 2015, so it's almost a decade, you know. So that's warrant the idea to actually conduct more research. So briefly on Bersih 1, it happened in 2007. So of course that time it was initiated by the opposition political parties, and then came 2008 general election, the political tsunami. People say that, oh, maybe Bersih could be should be credited for the outcomes that happened in the 2008 general election. And then we have the Bersih 2, where that's where the turning point, because it became, to some extent, is a non-partisan movement where they actually passed the baton to the civil society. And then we have the 2012, and then we have the recent one in 2015. So of course, apart from Bersih, we have several other small scale protests, such as the Lawyers' March, and we have the Turun. Turun is the protest for about the price hike. The Malaysia Geram is a recent rally by the media practitioners that protest about the suspension of the Age publication. So there you can see there's a quite a regular basis of the protest trends in Malaysia. And why did I focus on repression versus dissent? What are the linkage between the two? Protest and repression, they are complementary. There's a protest because there's a repression. When there's a repression, people protest about it. So the repression is very much relevant. But the people always ask, does repression work? Does the repression actually increase or decrease the protest? There's something for you to think about. Of course, when I was doing my research, there was no Bersih 4. Actually, that made my thesis a lot more easier, because the trend was very easy. Bersih 1, if you look at the number of protesters that's been arrested and the level of the repression from various forms such as the law and things like that, the Bersih 1, they actually arrested about, if I'm using the number, 245 protesters for the Bersih 1 in 2007. And then 2011, the level of repression was very, very high. If you could remember, they actually banned 91 individuals to enter the city center, and they also closed down the train station, and they closed down the streets and things like that. So the level of repression was really high, and they arrested about 1,667 individuals. Then, when it came to the following less than a year, actually, the Bersih decided to actually organize another street protest. At the time, they arrested about 512 individuals. So you can see the trend when, of course, during the Bersih 3, the level of repression reduced a little bit, if you look at it in various perspectives. So that can tell that when the repression is really high, the number of protesters being arrested was really high. But the Bersih 4 served as a big challenge for the analysis. The level of repression was high, when before days, even weeks before the people going for the Bersih 4, almost everybody was, is that a friend of mine was telling me that she was feeling like she was preparing to go to a war, because she was like getting all the masks and then went to the pharmacy and get everything, including the media practitioners. They get everything ready with the huge big bags. Everything is ready. Just prepare for a mass crackdown. But it didn't happen. I was there and it was like carnival. It was like, it doesn't feel right. So the first day I went, then to be frank, I felt boring, I felt bored. I was like, okay, people singing and things like that, what kind of protest is that? Although people still shouting like the hinder and things like that, the normal slogans. So the second day I decided I have to go. I didn't sleep over. So the second day I decided I must go again and check. So the same thing, because I was thinking, okay, maybe the second day they will arrest somebody. Again, of course my calculation was wrong, and they didn't. So after the event, I spent some time to actually think what happened actually. They of course questioned the 7 Bersih people, but there was just questioning and things like that. So the strategy actually changed. That reminded me to my PhD Viva. Because during my Viva, there's this examiner who's a deputy vice chancellor of a university. And he's quite, he's clearly quite a pro-government academics. Because he was very clear, he was asking me a lot of questions. Why are you a Bersih supporter? Because I could be biased, if I'm a supporter in my analysis. So he asked me, if I were to go back and tell the government the next action, if there's another Bersih rally, what should I advise? I was quite reluctant to say what you should do, but of course, being a rival, I had to tell. So I said, maybe you shouldn't do a crackdown. So that's what I'm not saying that what I told him actually delivered to the government. It didn't, of course. But what happened in the Bersih 4 proved that I did some thinking. I was thinking maybe personality matters. When I say personality, I mean the changing of the Home Minister. Now we have the Home Minister who is Datuk Sri Zainuddin. His background came from, he was involved in protests before. Yeah, he knows how the protest actually went. And he knows how to actually excite the protesters' mind actually. So this is what he told a media practitioner. If I went and arrest the protester during the Bersih, during the vulnerable political climate that we are having now, it's going to raise the international cost, So it can be, because every time they crack out, it will backfire, but this time it could be worse. So I think that's my calculation, that's my observation now. So that's what was I think, because as people say, in Bahasa, they say kaki demo. Kaki demo means those people who really like to go for demonstration. They're actually looking to be arrested. I mean, not to say to be arrested, but it's excitement, It's like, you're full of like preparing for war and things like that. So it's very excited. So it will be best because during the Bersih, actually there was a small scuffle between two sides, between the protesters and also the police. So, but the Bersih organizer was very, very careful. I remember the mariachi, the Bersih chair, announced straight away during the scuffle after that. She said Bersih would not support anyone who actually provoked the police. So there's a cooperation from the Bersih, the organizer, and the police. So that's my thoughts about the Bersih 4. And in Malaysia, I think there's one thing that we should refrain from singling out violence as the only form of the state repression. I think what the governments do is that they, the level of the repression was being done through the laws. So you can see there's a lot of amendments and the introducing of the new laws. So that's where the repressions come. It doesn't necessarily to be through the arrest and things like that. Yeah. And the second thing under this repression versus dissent I would like to share is the role of police. Yeah. So there's a term like policing protest. So we have this Peaceful Assembly Act, which is being introduced in 2012. So the key word in the act is actually the police should facilitate or assist the protester to ensure the assembly is being conducted peacefully. So they have this approach that they call 3R, 1C, 1E. 3R means restrain, stun, strict, caution, and enforce. Yeah, that's the approach that they use. It's kind of like a SOP, that kind of thing. But it does not reflect the spirit of the Peaceful Assembly Act. So that's a flaw that being highlighted in the Bersih inquiry actually. And of course the research on the policing protest is very interesting, you know, but it's also very sensitive. I recall in the past, but that article was not included in the book. I wrote about who owns the police, which landed me a little bit trouble, just because it doesn't seem right to ask who owns the police, although we see there's a selective prosecution by the police. Yeah. And I talk about the opportunities. When we talk about opportunities is actually I focus on the political opportunities. That is something, is actually a social movement theory, but of course I won't bog you down with the theory, what it is and things like that, but it's very simple. I argue that there's a certain level of political openings during the former Prime Minister Tun Abdullah Badawi. Yeah, that's where the 2007 was during his time. So during my extensive interviews with several stakeholders and things like that, of course some of them do not agree with what I examined, but generally thinks that there's a certain level of political opening. Without a space, when there's no space, you won't see a protest. Yeah, if there's no space at all. Yeah. So some of the dimensions that we can look in is media. Of course, media plays a very important role. So it serves as the opportunities actually to allow for the frequency of a protest to get actually higher. And availability of allies. That is very much debatable because one of the major allies would be the political parties when it comes to mobilization. But of course, the civil society will argue that no, they actually have the strength to actually mobilize people. But coming to the reality, political parties unfortunately still serve as an ally when it comes to mobilization. I'm not saying that the civil society are not doing their job well, but that's a reality on the ground. And there's also the if you notice, this upcoming trend of there's a lot of international human rights organizations that actually helping in a way indirectly to voice out whatever issues that we have, such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. So that also helped in terms in this case. And the last point that I would like to make about this is that the state repression, the political division among the elites, and the open access to the political system, the three combined together, actually they also serve as political opportunities for the growing of the social movement. Okay, so I come to the last point. protest and future. I think after the Bersih 4, we keep thinking, I think there's a lot of forums of post-Bersih 4 now, what to do. So there's the views being divided into two. Bersih is not successful enough just because it doesn't meet the demands, the 5 demands. Another side, and mostly those who went down and said, oh no, it's successful. So it's debatable it depends on which area that you're looking at. I had this very funny question from my friend after the first day of the Bersih. He did not go to the Bersih 4 because he said it's for security concern. So there's a fear was there. So there's an anger versus fear, you know. So I saw there's a lot of debates on, you know, the Malays are not there and things like that. It became a racial kind of issue, which I think is unnecessary. It doesn't mean those people who did not go down on the street does not support the same. It's too shallow to actually think that. Yeah. So there's a lot of silent majority over there that we do not see just because of some. They say in Penang, maybe it costs a lot to actually go to the KL and then book a hotel. Not everybody can actually afford to do that. So this friend of mine actually asked on the second day, in the morning before I actually, when I was preparing myself to go to the Bersih. So, oh sorry, it was the second day that he asked. He said, second day that he asked, he said, so today when you go on the street, march with the Bersih, make sure Najib resign today. So I was like, okay, you did not go to the Bersih, you supported it, yes. But you are asking me to ensure that our Prime Minister resign by today. Does it really make sense? Of course, no. And it actually annoyed me. And I was trying to explain to him that, you know, protest does not translate into direct, I mean, the 5 demands right to dissent. How do you expect to have that straight away? But it's the momentum that they build up, it's the awareness that they build up that actually count. So is Bersih a success? It is a success when we look at the awareness that they build, and also the color yellow has become so sensitive. Yeah. And another area to look at their achievement is from the spillover effect that I call it. Spillover effects means that since the establishment of the Bersih, the formation of the Bersih, you can see there's a lot of formation of other movements and the social and the NGO groups that's coming up. So this is also a success because they gain the strength from there. They think, oh, maybe we should do something, and that's where coalition is coming from. Yeah? And also, of course, the challenge is always the sustainability of movement. I think we had a lot of debates when Dato' Ambika decided to actually, Dato' Ambika and Pak Samet was actually, they decided to pass the batons to Maria Chin. So there was a lot of debates on the leadership and things like that and how to sustain the movement. At one point, they were thinking, maybe like Global Bersih, they actually registered as NGO under the Swiss side, which I personally do not agree. For me, movement has a lot of space to actually grow rather than tying up as an NGO under the rules and regulations. And I think it's almost 30 minutes. My last very point is I would like to share with you is I think the Bersih always give people a sentiment that it is a movement to topple the government. Yeah, since the establishment until today, especially in the Bersih 4, it's always about topple the movement. And there's a book, of course, it is not my book, but there's two scholars, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephen, in their very prominent book. Actually, this book is one of the best sellers. Why Civil Resistance Work? Because during the Bersih 4, the NGOs, some people were thinking that maybe somebody should die. That will maybe eventually spark something, you know. That's happened when the Arab Spring, you know, somebody light himself with a fire and that spark. So we need a spark. So do we need a spark? You can argue about it. But this book it is famous for 123 campaigns spanning from 1900 years until 2006. That their research actually showed that violent resistance, the success rate was 26%. But the non-violent one, because Erica herself was actually a believer that we should use violence, but her research actually proved her wrong. The non-violent cases was actually 53% to actually achieve the goals. So Malaysia has a population of around 30 million. So you can do the counting of, because according to the book, we need to get 3.5% of the population to protest so that we can get a better.
That's in your book.
Oh yes, that's in my book because I quote her.
I read.
Yes. So because I find the research very interesting. So yeah. And in the end, I'd like to say political climate is important, and I still believe the people power and the popular pressure from below is still very important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ying Hooi, for I think very clear and well-structured analysis of Bersih in particular, but a way of understanding how that particular social movement could fit into a politics of change. I've already got questions in my mind. I'm going to hold them for a moment and allow Stephen to respond to what Ying Hooi had to say. Thank you, Stephen.
I'm sorry if I have to sit because my notes here with me on iPhone, so it doesn't work if I stand up with my iPhone with my hand. Not stylish enough for the youngest MP in Parliament. But anyway, thank you everybody. Thank you to Ying Hooi for your excellent presentation. I think I'm a Chinese, I think it's very hard to see it, but I'm Chinese. And if there's anything I can say about Bersih and Chinese is that, Chinese has gone liberal. They dare to come out and live on the street on the Hungry Ghost Month. And to a Bersih, say 4, not 3A, 4. I told you I'm not going to be academic, I'm the politician. Before that, I think I need to share how this happened, how I end up on this panel. It's going to be a short one, and Gareth asked me to share it. Ying Hooi and I, we are not really that close. I've read the articles, in fact I've read the Who Owns the Police. I even texted her when she was asked by the police. But a few months back, I think it was in April, we attended, two of us unplanned, we attended a forum by C4, the transparency NGO led by our friend Cynthia Gabriel. And so we sat beside each other, and so I asked her, how are you doing? Trying to catch up, small talks. She said, hey, I'm launching my book in Penang soon. I said, wow, that's nice, that's really good because I've been following your articles. So when is this going to be? Ying Hooi opened up her MacBook. Was it a MacBook? A MacBook, yeah, and a document which I believe was sent by Gareth with schedules of all these Nusantara forums. And when she scrolled down to her forum, to her panel, I saw my name there. My God, why is my name there? At that moment, I felt like one of those random audience that the magician asked out and pick a card, and then suddenly the card has my name. So I was a bit embarrassed, she was a bit embarrassed, and then we said, hey, fine, okay, I'm a fan, so yeah, why not? And this is Penang, I'm here. And I bought the book among 500 ringgit of other things in Gerak Budaya, my gosh. Yeah, and I read it. It's a page turner, I can assure you, and I love some of these tidbits, quotes. Dissent is the highest form of patriotism. That brings back really a very fond memory, because that reminds me of the first ever political book, Malaysian, that I've come across, was by my mentor, Chong Eng, currently the State Assemblyman Exco for Youth and Sport and Women Affairs. Her book was titled 批评政府是爱国. Criticizing the government is patriotism. So it's very nice affinity there. And you have a chapter on gender equality. You have a chapter on politicians and their academic qualification. I have no PhD, but you know what? I always say those with fake degrees, whether basic degrees or PhD, at least they know that degrees are useless. No, but that was your critique of the system. Basically the book is really about, it's really Ying Hooi's effort to, I think, out of her love for the country, effort to criticize the system so as to make it better. She doesn't always provide solutions, but she asks questions, and I think a lot of right questions. Yeah. So I'm going to ask some questions. How many of you know how much the state of Penang spends on welfare program in 2015? I'm going to give you a free Penang monthly, which is free. My God, you know. Are you? Do you know? You don't. But you raise up your hand. What's that?
50 million maybe.
50? 50 50, salah. Okay, no free Penang monthly, you can get it from Penang Institute instead. It's 117 million, about 30% of the state budget. Okay, easier question. What is the theme of the 2015 Penang State Budget speech by the Chief Minister? My God, this is like the most learned crowd in Penang. Free Penang money. This is what? This is September. I'll throw in August. To invest in education and to generate growth to win the future for Malaysia. Third question. How many of you know the name of the Chief Minister's wife? My God, no free Penang money. But do you see the problem here, my friends? When have we now moved from, and who owns the police? I don't know, I can't find the answer in the article, by the way. When have we moved from the critical, the important, the vital, the public, to something, with due respect to Betty, of course, Betty is an important person, to something private. Of course, some of you may argue, some politicians' wife matter more than the others. We are talking about. This is the sense that we get from the book. Yeah. We talk about Bersih. I was at Bersih. It was bad. I had to sleep on the street. But I see a lot of people enjoying themselves seriously. You had the same feeling, so I thought I was the only one that was really quite bored. But yeah, a lot of people were enjoying it. It was carnival-like. People were singing poetry, etc. Politician speech, thank God, was minimal. Even when I was given the mic, I sang. Thank you very much. Yeah, so it was carnival-like, it was fun, there was euphoria, and then yes, again, after post-Bersih, people naturally ask, what's next? What's next? Did anything change? And your question, did anything happen right away? Why didn't anything happen right away? I think something did change. I think for the 500,000 people who gathered in Kuala Lumpur and the tens of thousands who gathered everywhere else. I came back on Sunday. I reached Bukit Mertajam about 3 o'clock. Before I reached my house, my wife was waiting for me. Michael, you were sleeping on the street. Somebody texted me, hey, Stephen, come to this place. There's another Bersih gathering nearby. I had to go to that Bersih gathering. Then I thought, okay, fine, now I can go back. No, come to this place. There's another Bersih gathering in Bukit Mertajam. So, yeah, the tens of thousands all over Malaysia. I think something has changed after Bersih. What has changed? Something has changed inside all of us. Those of us who were involved, mainly, but those of us who were also watching it, and ensuring concern over it. What has changed? I think we have gone from cognitive knowledge, we know the country is in deep shit, to a more experiential knowledge. Now we know deep in our guts, our country is in deep shit, and we have to at least think of the alternatives. So something has changed. Then what next? What's next? I like to ask what's next because this is the question that everybody's bringing back to me. I may not have the answer as all politicians do, but I think I wrote another smaller book. When I read Ying Hooi's book, I felt that my book is really footnotes and pamphlets. But I wrote a smaller book and I said, when everybody is busy doing something, busy liking Bersih website, busy rah-rah post Bersih, I think the most revolutionary thing to do is to do nothing. You get it? When everybody is busy doing something, the most revolutionary thing to do is really to do nothing. But when I say nothing, I don't mean passive nothing. I mean really to now post Bersih. Now our knowledge has slightly changed. I mean, it's really very technical. It's really very inner. From a mind knowledge to a heart and experiential knowledge. Now what we need to do is really to reflect on what are the alternatives. What are the alternatives? Because doing more of the same is not enough anymore. And I think this is where books like Ying Hooi, writings like Ying Hooi comes in. Encouraging us to really take a step back and relook at the system. And I like to repeat the word system because I really don't think it's a personal problem. One MPV, 2.6 billion, I really don't think it's because Najib is greedy, because, put Gareth, Richard, Ismail, I don't know how your name is arranged, but, put him there with this context and situation, I don't know, maybe lesser, but, I don't know, I don't want to judge him, but what I'm trying to say here is that it's really not about individuals, it's really not about personal greed. The problem is, I do not want to use the word capitalism, but I want to use another word, a lousy, a lamer word. I want to use the word. The problem is a system which tells us we can buy anything. We can buy anything. We can even buy support when we do not have that. Therefore, 48% government. We can buy transparency. We can buy vindication from the former Transparency International Malaysia chairman nonetheless. So it's a culture which tells us money can buy anything, and this is not original. This is not from me, and this is the most academic part of my sharing. This guy from Harvard, Michael Sander, he wrote a book called "What Money Can't Buy," which I didn't buy from your bookstore. It's there, but I think you should stock it. It's really interesting. In a society where we can put a price tag on almost everything, in the case buying leaked exam papers, immorality is very clear. Okay, this is my word. Article in Malaysian Insider. He said, because markets don't only allocate goods, they also express and promote certain attitude towards the goods being exchanged. Paying kids to read, for example, might get them to read more, but also teach them to regard reading as a chore rather than a source of intrinsic satisfaction. Some of the good things in life are corrupted or degraded if it's turned into commodities. We have to decide how to value goods in question: health, education, family life, nature, arts, civic duties, and so on. These are moral and political questions, not merely economic ones. It is a system where everything is quote-unquote viable. And there's a very interesting chapter. In fact, I realized that some of the things that they have written, I have written on them as well, in a lesser way. But for example, the problem of UPSR leakage, leakages, the standard 6 government examination, public examination. This for me, I've written an article. I said this for me is the classic example of the naked emperor. For years, it was pornography, public pornography on display, but nobody wanted to acknowledge it. Until recently, of course, it became a big hoo-ha. Somebody said Official Secret Act, and Ying Hooi wrote that there was a suggestion even to do the paper in UK. But it goes back to this: everything can buy system. You can pay extra for education, tuition. You can buy exam papers. You can buy good grades. Yeah, everything is viable. Of course, the solution doesn't lie in sending the paper to be produced in UK. Because the solution is not individuals, examiners, it's not individuals, teachers, it's not individual grades. It's a system which does not guarantee transparency. It's a system that does not guarantee accountability. It's a system that does not guarantee efficiency. My friend Surin was talking about the local council just before the forum starts. So what we really, that what I'm trying to do in my little capacity as the Member of Parliament for Bukit Mertajam, this is, from now on, it's effort, self-effort. But you know, I've always said we want to change the equation. We want to just do more of the same. We don't want to, you know, I write longer paper than you, I have better ideas than you, but no, we really want to change the equation. How do we do that? I like what you say on page 56, chapter 15. You see, I read your book. It's not it. Real power lies in the hands of the ruler, but impressions are given, it is derived from the will of the people. I like the word real power. The rest are all, you know, basically she's saying, you know, in a democracy that we are in today, it's just a semblance of democracy, because real power doesn't lie in your hand, no matter how many times you vote for Pakatan Rakyat or whoever. Yeah. And in my own words, recently I started a project in Bukit Mertajam. We call it Your Money, Your Say. Duit kita, no, our money, our say. Duit kita, hak kita. 我们的钱，我们做主。Basically, it started around this conversation about, you know, politicians in rallies saying the people are the boss, rakyat itu tuan, people are the masters. But come on, if Ying Hooi today I say, come, let's venture into a business together. You are the boss, I'm the boss. But when it comes to money, I make the last final decision. So Ying Hooi is not really the boss, I'm the boss. Real power is in money. I mean, of course, there are many other important things in life, justice, whatever, etc. But what I'm trying to do is, I think it's enough for us to say, you know, all these abstract social sciences stuff, human rights, justice. What is important? Trust me, I believe that. I believe in them. But in Bukit Mertajam, we have launched a 4-phase, 1-year project. First phase is completing in a few weeks' time. We are basically putting up 100,000 ringgit of our allocation to allow the people of Bukit Mertajam, one constituency, a state constituency called Macam Bubuk, 30,000 voters, to first decide on what sort of project they want to do, and then vote on which one on the list. Vote on the list. It's a 1-year project. So, and it doesn't just come overnight. We have been doing research, we have been doing discussion, we have been doing training since 2011 in Bukit Mertajam, in MPSP. So, what we wanted to do is really change the equation. I mean, yes, we couldn't do local government election right now, but that doesn't mean we cannot give local democracy to the people. That doesn't mean we cannot give real power to the people. Yes, it's just 100,000, it's not 10,000, 100,000 at this point. But, you know, I'm not ambitious. I'm thinking the local council on Seberang Perai has about 200 million ringgit budget every year. What if in the next 2 years, because of my success here in this small town, people around begin to pressure the government and say, hey, you should do this as well. So that 5% of that 200 million is being used or is being decided this way. People's direct influence. You have 10 million ringgit. Or maybe even slightly further in the future, 2.6 billion, which is really 1% of the federal budget, is being decided this way. Direct participation, direct intervention of the people. That, I think, you do change the equation. But it all begins with people knowing deep in their guts something is terribly wrong and the alternative is pressing, and they have to begin to think about it. Thank you very much.
It was such a brilliant response, I could almost see you outside after the fall.
Our atone next week in the pyramid.
Your atone food. Brilliant and very complimentary sets of presentation. Just to perhaps get the ball rolling, as a historian, I always like to put these kind of very contemporary analysis in some kind of longer term context. And your analysis started with Bersih 2007, that was your case study in essence. And people with slightly longer memories, of course, may go back to the Reformasi movements of 1997, 1998. I remember them very well. The first time that I had was covered in water, laced with all kinds of horrible chemicals. back in 1997. But there's also an interesting phenomenon which marks Malaysia out, or perhaps Malaysia and Singapore from other Southeast Asian countries, is that there wasn't, at least since 1969, a long-term culture of street protest, social movements and civil society. And I wonder if you've done any thinking in accounting for that. I mean, I'm comparing obviously with Indonesia or Thailand, and perhaps the most well-known exemplar in our region, of course, the Philippines, with People's Power in 1986. So, relatively historically shallow roots, how does it account for it? And can it be accounted for mainly by the kind of repressive authoritarianism that we saw in the aftermath of '69? Is that one kind of explanation? The second question that came to mind, especially bringing the two of you together, I mean, you're an academic scholar, I guess, given your experience in the Viva, you have to at least pretend some kind of political objectivity. Nevertheless, I'm kind of reading off your book where your sympathies lie as a supporter of a healthy civil society, vibrant social movements, and a kind of independence of mind. But Stephen also is part of that, but he also belongs to and is a very able and articulate representative of a political party. And I was wondering about that particular coalitional relationship between political parties on the one hand and social movements, civil society organisations, and how important there's a relative autonomy or relative independence from the two, or is it inevitable that there's a kind of confluence, a kind of coming together in the ways that you, Stephen, seem to be suggesting may be the case. And I think a third question that comes to mind is obviously the original driving motor force of Bersih 1 in particular, the whole foundation of the movement, was evidently, self-evidently, deep-seated electoral reform, because, you know, a system that is gerrymandered, a system that is basically, as Stephen was saying, so much of life is today, and it is under capitalism, by the way, so don't be afraid to use the C word, can be bought and sold, but obviously, given the, we like his analytical language, the shit state that the country is in is a deeply analytical term. But the parlous state of the country, politically, in terms of social and cultural tensions and cleavages, the economy is really up shit creek and so on and so on. That tended to broaden the sets of demands as articulated by Ying Hooi's friend. Well, you better come back tonight and Najib has got to have gone and so on. Is that problematic? That in fact, perhaps a doable or a feasible set of demands around profound electoral reform, which would be quite a significant change, is it a dilution of that particular thing or an amplification of a set of political demands that we now, people are talking about clean government, but also the economy and also targeting particular exemplars of what precisely is disease and wrong with the system. So there are three kind of thoughts and reflections I'd like to bring. Maybe we get some initial responses and then that gives you all thinking time to think of extremely eloquent questions to put to our two panelists.
Thank you, Gareth. I hope I get all the three questions very clear. Okay. The first one, Gareth was asking that after the 1969, the racial riots, and then actually after the 1969, we have actually a very dynamic and vibrant student activism in 1970s. And of course, Gareth was asking, during the 1986 and 80s basically, so the Philippines, Indonesia, basically in Southeast Asia, the trend has been changing, but why Malaysia is still, remaining. I actually call Malaysians are very tolerant. We have these tolerant identities. So I think it shows in many ways, including whether to involve yourself into a protest or not. So there's a tolerancy there, So, Actually, although my thesis started from more contemporary, but I think I mentioned about the political openings during the Abdullah Badawi's time. I acknowledge the reformasi movement. I actually struggle myself to why is it a 1998 and then it is kind of like the reformasi is kind of like, not to say failure, but it doesn't sustain itself because that is personality driven, yeah. But the Bersih is issue driven, so that's a different thing. And what happened was my argument was that the prime minister was different. We had Dr. Mahathir, Dr. Mahathir, who is very much in control with the system. So that plays a role. That's why personality matters for me. Yeah, in that. So I hope that answers your first question. I hope so. So the second one is it about the importance of the social movement, civil society, that kind of thing. Before, I'm actually quite a baby in the university, and I have some hesitation to actually call myself as an academic because I don't see myself as one. So, and I also have the issues to actually call myself an activist because I'm not that, the activism is different, to label yourself as an activist is a different story. So that I credited to my background. I was actually working with the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia before I actually joined. Of course, before that I was in the corporate, and then I joined the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia. That actually opened up my eyes because having the exposures in the corporate, it doesn't really review you into, expose yourself into the subject of human rights because it is profit driven. But having the degree in the international relations, that is something that I struggle. Why are people keep on talking about profits? So I was thinking, I was struggling, why aren't we talk about human rights and things like that? That's why I changed the career. So when serving in several years in the Human Rights Commission, that's where I realized that the civil society and the social movements, the NGOs, they have a lot of roles to play, but they are being restricted under many restrictions, be it the law, because most of the NGOs, they have to register under the company, and the only human rights organizations that be able to register under the ROS is the HAKAM, the National Human Rights Society. That was during the Tunku Abdul Rahman time. But after that, basically, so that's where I think I have to do something, just increase the awareness. For me, the awareness is very important through the education. Yeah, so that's where the concerns came from. And the third question for Garrett. Bersih one did start as a movement that is solely for clean and fair election. It's not free, because for Bersih, our election is free, but it's not fair and it's not clean. So that's where they started the idea of we must do something with the system, with the clean and fair elections. And after the second Bersih 2, Bersih 3, they remain with the clean and fair election as a core demand. But of course, the Bersih 4, they changed it a little bit. They still asked for clean election, but the election was nowhere to be seen. It should be about 2018, so it's not close enough. But movement being movement, it is very common for a movement to actually shift their demands. So I don't see that as a problem. So of course people debate why did Bersih actually change their demand. For me it's simple, the movement is allowed to actually change their demands according to the political climates that we are having now. So they're still asking for clean election, but before we have the clean election, we need a clean government as well. So it's still interrelated. Yeah. So I hope that's sufficient.
I'm not going to answer every question, but I just managed to catch some of these debates in your reflection, and I want to respond to them. The first is, once again, back to my thoughts about something has changed. We cannot underestimate the kind of transformation that goes on in a person when they actually goes out really as especially in the Chinese community, to go out. It was a joke, but on the other level, it's not a joke. To go out in a month where we were brought up to think if this is a month where all the ghosts are out, you don't go out, and you definitely don't sleep on the street. That's one. But sleeping on the street, it takes effort, real big effort. Even for me, truth is, confession time, I wanted to rent a nearby hotel. But when Lim Kit Siang said, I'm going to sleep on the street, I said, no, yeah, I have to. I felt ashamed of myself, therefore, but yeah, it takes effort. What I'm trying to say is it takes effort. So something has changed inside of many people who took part directly and indirectly, which is where I disagree with Ying Hooi when she said, Reformasi. I think we are the product of Reformasi. I was a child of Reformasi. We are the product of Reformasi. Something has changed in 16, 17 years ago. I wasn't in KL. I was a Mahathir boy. I told my mom, why the heck you're voting for Lim Kit Siang? He's a bloody troublemaker. But something has changed when we saw the TV, something has changed. And that is very important. The major protests and all, I'm not going to respond directly to that, but I want to point to one really excellent book from which I got it from Gerak Budaya. It's by James C. Scott. It's called Weapons of the Weak, Everyday Forms of Resistance. I've been looking for this book for ages, and then I found it in Gerak Budaya recently. It's about how he chronicles small little acts of rebellion, not the big movement. Things like in the middle of work, I just go out and take a bath. Or I drag my feet and my boss call me. Or I just delay or postpone stuff. I just don't want to give in fully to my work, etc. So he said that these are all very important little signals, little movements, little activities that leads to bigger resistance. So I think it's an excellent book. The third thing that I want to respond to, which I think is going to be interesting and controversial for those, especially of you who read Chinese, is the relationship between civil society and politicians. And I think we see definitely there is a difference. Definitely there's a difference, especially in our society where and I say this humbly to people like Susan who has been involved for the longest time. And I came from civil society background. The civil society culture has not yet, for the lack of a word, come to a form of maturity. We are still exploring, we are still learning, we are still expanding in terms of organization, in terms of ideas, in terms of mobilizing, etc. Yeah? Conceptualizing. Political party has the resources, has the support, has the history. Yeah? Hence the advantage. So you see the problem after Bersih, after the China Bersih 4.0. The Chinese NGO is now fighting with certain leaders in DAP, Chinese speaking, and they all speak and fight in Chinese. I can't read. Yeah. There is now a contestation of space. What should you do? What should I do? Why are you so arrogant? On one hand, the civil society asks this DAP leader, and on the other hand, the DAP leader said, hey you want to come out and play, you need to tahan, you need to bear the pain. You can criticize Najib, but criticize you cannot tahan. And then he said, hey, you are really arrogant. What are you doing? We are all volunteers. We are trying our best. This is the limitation is there. The situation is limited, etc. And then there's even a movement formed by former DAP staff, people who supported DAP, saying, hey Chinese, my God, thank God. Which means many of us will not know about this. Really little micro universe. We are going to distance ourselves from DAP because no DAP leader came out to criticize this guy. Mainly because people like me don't understand what they're talking about. But yeah, we're going to distance ourselves to that extent. So there is definitely a gap. For better or for worse, I'm not going to evaluate at this point, but yeah, there's definitely a gap, and I think this gap can be worked on in the sense that whether definitely there should be some kind of independence, but this gap can also be worked on to be more complementary these two entities. Yeah, thank you.
Good. I think there's three interesting sets of responses to my questions. But let's open it up. I'm sure there must be queries and comments and so on. Yes, there's already a flurry of hand. Let me capture 2 or 3 questions.
Something to add. Your presentation is indeed very good. I fully agree with it. But I think there's one aspect of the civil struggle which is not really touched on that. And that is the ethnic cleavage. That is, to my mind, a barrier that we have to overcome. If you look at the previous Bersih rallies in the past, there was a significant degree of Malay participation. This particular one, though there was Malay participation, it wasn't as much as was the case before. I know because I was moving at the level. I did not reach ABCC because I chose to be at that level where I can talk to many people.
Yeah.
And the issue that they tell me is that one of the reasons why not as many Malays attended is because of the issue of kesahan or legitimacy. They felt that they were not included. I mean, the absence of pass is, in my mind, rather sad. But it is unavoidable in view of the conflict which pass has the deal. Now, when you look at rallies like this, you look at civil society groups, you take a look from the Malay perspective, the rural Malay perspective. How did they see it? I have no quarrels with what we are fighting for, the streets of KL. But the Malay perspective will look at it and say, it's a challenge to my birthright. I cannot join it. Because in joining it is undermining my own position. How do we do that? This is an issue which we really have to do. And I'm personally having a lot of problems trying to get Malays to join the DAP. Because the first thing they say is, what have you got in it for me? I may not like these other folks. Most of them are thieves anyway. But at the very least, they say that they take care of our interests. What have you got for me? This is one issue that we have to look at. And how do we redress it? This is one aspect which we cannot afford to solve.
That's a very interesting Arafin, because at the one level, Stephen, you're talking about this kind of existential transformation of the political being, but politics also remains very instrumental in many ways. You know, what can you do for me? And there's no love lost for the present ruling regime, but that question has some purchase and has some resonance. And it has been a critique, of course, is that the civil society movement is fundamentally urban, middle class, educated, etc. But there's a bigger constituency, and certainly in electoral terms, there's much more to be won. And so those questions, I think, still remain in abeyance. And Arafin, you're absolutely right, they're not yet resolved, whether by the DAP or indeed Bersih as a wider social movement. And it struck me when they were both talking, of course, if you use just the analytical language of civil society or social movement, those can equally capture movements that we may not support, movements that are right-wing, movements that are supremacist, who also use social media very, very effectively and so on. So the contestation is not only between something that we sort of analytically capture in the term social movement, civil society, versus the government or versus the state. There's a whole myriad, I think, of social forces that are at play. One of the great things I remember about 2008, I don't like using the word tsunami, but there was a real tsunami in 2004, which 250,000 people were killed. So political tsunami, sorry, it doesn't work for me. But the events of 2008 election, what did Mahathir do? Very, very successfully. He reinvented himself as a blogger. He used the new social media, and he has a huge loyal following and so on. Those of you who read my bookshop Facebook posting yesterday, you know what I'm calling it, The Master and Mahathir, because the devil came to town. If you know the novel, The Master and Margarita. There were 2 or 3 more questions. Yes, sir.
I would like to start on this question as to why after 1969 we didn't really have any mass socialism. I think the events of May 13, 1969 left a psychological scar, particularly on the non-Malays. And Barisan Nasional used this very effectively to threaten the non-Malays that if there were to be any large-scale dissent, they are going to see racial violence and they are going to be victims because the power lies with the agencies of government which are largely dominated by the Malays. And this is also the reason why I think there was not much Malay participation as Arifin mentioned just now. Basically because Bersih Nasional has perfected the divide and rule policy. See, whatever Bersih Nasional does, when it comes to election, just like what our Prime Minister said just before Bersih 4, if UMNO is not there, the Malays will become bangsa. And one of the most powerful instruments is actually religion of Islam. They say if UMNO is not there, Islam is under threat. This is something that I think the speaker has missed out. And I also feel that you should have actually covered Hindra. Because after 1969, Hindra was the first movement, a non-Malay movement, that had the courage to take up Bersih Nasional by the horn. And I think that encouraged non-Malays generally to express dissent. Because previously they were always afraid. Let's be content with what we have. We have a relatively good life. Malaysia is doing well, especially when our economy was doing well. So we don't mind compromising our interests, so long as we can maintain peace and stability. Thank you.
We'll capture 2 or 3 more still. 2 or 3 more contributions.
You mentioned social movements and civil society and politicians. There are different kinds of people's movements, social movements. So I think it's not fair to say that you know, this particular civil society. No, just talking about different social movements, yeah? Because, like you say, sometimes to be on a quiet watching and doing quietly, just like the environment movement, the grassroots movement, the women's movement, all kinds of movement. And a lot of times these are done quietly by a lot of people, lobbying, advocating, yeah? So I think different people have different inklings or propensities and capabilities. I totally agree that Bersih 4 has changed our psyche in many ways. And I totally agree with you that so many Chinese were always very afraid to go out for protests. Like some of my friends say, well, I'm not doing it for myself, it's for the future generations. And it was very brave for them who never want to go for a protest. And they were all prepared and they were disappointed in a way. But on the other hand, they were saying that we felt so good and so safe. And it's amazing that we were not arrested. And that comes to my question, what is the strategy of Bersih 4? I thought they were very clever to have it 34 hours and just before Merdeka. How are they going to arrest them? 34 hours, who are you going to arrest? Even though they threatened, don't go, you know, you'll be arrested, don't go, we're going to do this, no yellow. We were all laughing when they said they're going to arrest people with the yellow t-shirt. And I think there was this general euphoria that we are not afraid, they can't do that, there's a lot of threat, you know. So I would like to know, like, what's the strategy? Because from the outside we don't know, but looking at it, we thought the people were very clever to have it for 34 hours and then to end it right midnight, just before the 31st celebration. And friends who were there, and now they want to slap Bersih with the bill for cleaning up. Friends who were there, they said we were each given a black plastic bag, and we couldn't even feel it because people were taking care of the garbage. And that reminds me of when we were in Penang, there were 10,000 people. We went back after Bersih, the field was just clean because we all clean up after ourselves. So that says that it's possible that we can behave ourselves and we can work together. So I think regardless of what is said, it definitely has raised the psyche of the Chinese to say that we own this country too and that we should put in the extra effort.
Okay.
Let me capture the 3, get you to do some initial responses and then we'll come back.
Okay, thank you for the questions. First question from Dr. Arifin. Yes, I do acknowledge that there's this ethnic cleavage, but we also have the reason why I did not touch about it is I still want to see us as Malaysians. That's the one thing that actually I was myself struggling whether should I highlight about the Malay compositions and things like that. But I decided that also in my very recent article in the Malaysian Insider, I still want to believe that it goes beyond the racial composition, because that's why I said there's a silent majority. Because after the Bersih event, I did meet up with some family members who are Malays. So they were traditionally the government supporter. But it's very interesting when when I just first stepped into the house, they asked, did you go to the Bersih? Which in the past, they never ever asked me that kind of question. They would be like, oh, why did you want to go, that kind of thing, you know? But the effort of them actually asking me from every single person made me think that maybe what's being discussed about the ethnic cleavage, you know, perhaps you know, it's being raised up. It's true to some extent, but it's also must be fair to say that there's these groups of people who still believe, but it takes time. It's not easy for them to change their position right away because it's very new. But the political scandal changed them. They came to realize that something is really wrong. But it seems like if you want to argue from the ethnic cleavage, if you look at the Chinese back in 2007, the Malays were small, right, in the Bersih. So you can argue about, you know, each Bersih is a different composition, but it will be never-ending story if we keep on going on the racial thing. But I acknowledge that, but then also link up with the civil society flow. If you notice, the 7 persons who are being questioned, only one is Chinese. So maybe you want to do some thinking about it. Yeah. And the second question by the gentleman, yes, I did not cover the hinder. Of course, I did not. I mentioned it in my piece, but I did not cover it extensively because it will be a conflict for me to actually go beyond the racial composition. That will actually warrant another thesis. And actually, there's a lecturer from Sabah University. He has a big thesis on Hindraf actually on the marginalized group, and that's how he argued about it. And one thing that's very interesting that I think to answer the first and second questions, if you notice, each time we have the Bersih movement, we also have the counter movements. That is something that we should not dismiss as well. Yeah. And the third question, the strategy of Bersih. First, I am not part of the Bersih, so I cannot answer about their strategy. But what I observed from the Bersih poll is that I think they learned from the mistakes, especially the Bersih 3 back in 2012, where someone actually, the barricade was broke through. I think they were being very careful because if you were in the scene, you can see that every person and the volunteers was huge numbers of volunteers. They really want to ensure everything is so orderly and peacefully. That's why I came to another conclusion in my article that we had this very orderly protester, and maybe they get the idea from the umbrella movement, you know. If you see the Hong Kong movement, they were being chopped as the most polite protesters that ever have.
So I was referring to the difference vis-a-vis Bersih and that specific incident. But yes, I agree with you. There are many quiet agencies doing changes quietly throughout the years. But just a reminder to everyone, Bersih 1, politicians were involved. There were politicians from BAP and us, if I'm not mistaken, or among others, Chin Tong, Teresa Kok. They were involved as part of the organizing committee. The elephant in the room, yes, Malay attendance. Thank you, Arifin, for pointing that out. I think the issue of legitimacy is real, but you know, from my interaction with people who didn't go, especially from my friends in the past, the legitimacy is not because they view the gathering as illegal or as, you know, quote-unquote sinful, but because it was not sanctioned by leaders. And these are highly disciplined political units, political entities. they will only be mobilized by their leaders. And I think for this, this is new. This is new. Past not taking part in this mass movement. In the recent years, this is very new for PAS. So I think the response was, the response is also, you know, we conform to what our leaders said. If our leader had not sanctioned this, so we don't go. I'm not sure this is going to be the case if there's another Bersih, maybe, I don't know, next month or whatever. They may have formulated another response. But as of now, we are talking about highly disciplined political entity who will only be moved by mobilization within the party and leadership. So I can assure you that there are many grassroots Malays, even in my constituency, who said that, you know, we supported Bersih, but we did not go, not because we think it's wrong or we think it's a Chinese thing. The Chinese thing is, of course, the after result of Malay not turning up, but because our leader did not sanction it. And yes, urban civil society based, urban based, but politicians, political parties are also guilty of that. I mean, remember our manifesto 505, lower the price of cars. So you are only speaking to those who are in the urban areas driving cars. You're not talking to those in the kampung, in the rural areas. Talking about free university education. You're not talking about those in the kampung who are struggling even to complete high school. So yes, I think our discourse needs to be more encompassing. We need to be more inclusive. But the fact is, a lot of these changes in Malaysia, at least at this time, is happening in urban centers. Yeah, thank you.
A question and a comment. Never mind. Okay. The question basically is this: as a layman and a student of history, I guess, amateur student of history, my interesting question is to the presenter today: is do you think in Malaysia, for Malaysia, is change good? Which change is going to be more effective, evolutionary or revolutionary? Because if you look at that, we quoted the one about the study done, and 56% of the movements that were non-violent were successful. But you have to take in context of time and which part of the world. But if you look at the past history of the past 30 years in Southeast Asia, actual change that had happened in Southeast Asia historically has been revolutionary. From Thailand to Indonesia, real change when dictatorships were removed. Okay, Burma is a separate case by itself. Philippines, all right. So as a layman and as an academic, I mean, you look at the history of and the cultural and social and political situation in this country, which I'm not talking about the cost. There may be a very high cost, okay, or maybe a very low cost. So the key question is, from our history and from our cultures, which would eventually more effective in bringing about structural change in the country, evolutionary or revolutionary? That's one. Okay. Second one is a comment. I think for academics, and I think a lot of us, as the gentleman over there was pointing out, we're still looking at Malaysian politics and society, which is a fact though, but always from the ethnic viewpoint. I have a different take on it now, like different generation. Maybe the academics should see the political movements and social movements in a partition between rural and urban. I think there has been generational change where the needs and the wants and the demands of the urban population are very different from the needs and demands from the rural population. And whether you are rural Indian, whether you are rural Malay or rural Chinese, your demands and your take of politics is going to be very different from the urban take. And maybe looking at that perspective may give us a different kind of answers or solutions to problems, rather than fall back on the stale or the government dogma that has been pumped into our brains that everything is ethnic or religion. Because I really feel as a country in Malaysia today, where she is, we have evolved to a point the needs of the urban population and semi-urban population are very different. And what's holding us back also is different between problems in the urban areas and problems in the rural areas. But no one seems to address it from, and this is a dirty word, from a class perspective.
Because that is hark back to the days of communism and socialism in our country. It's a big no-no. But the reality is, there is a difference between class structure in this country, inclusively between the rural and urban areas. Thank you.
Can we capture a few more of this round? I don't know if the microphone will reach.
Bersih.
Yes.
I don't think I think we do. Thanks. So part of the dilemma is whether should we talk about race or should we not talk about race, but I want to talk about race because I'm Malaysian, so I'll ask a racial question. Part of the lack of presence of Malays in Bersih partly attributable to past pulling out of the organizational support structure. So I'm wondering whether who could fill the void of past. So one option would be the Gerakan Harapan Baru, I think, registered as Parti Amanah. The DAP has a Malay recruitment strategy as well. So the DAP and PKR has sort of maxed out on non-Malay urban votes. There is no more room to expand them. And if you are saying sayonara to pass, someone needs to fill that void. And I'm just wondering, who do you think could fill that void? Whether is it the Gerakan Harapan Baru or a DAP Malay recruitment strategy? Because the non-Malay is a shrinking population, right? It's a shrinking electorate. And the future lies not in the non-Malay votes, but in the Malay electorate. I think that is the core strategy.
First of all, I think you should analyze what is the significance of the peaceful demonstration of the rally. In the past, it might have been aggressive, a bit destructive. Okay? Now, second, you must understand, if the government had information that it will be more Chinese beforehand, we're not sure. Here, you can see the government is, what they call that, not reacting harshly to the demonstrators. Maybe because they didn't have enough information of the content or composition of the rally goers. Understand what I'm saying? If they had information beforehand, their reaction might have been different. So do not take this as a good example that government has receded into the sidelines. Right? Be very careful because they didn't have information. Now, on the other hand, you can say that, okay, to all the people in Malaysia, there's always possibility of a rally being peaceful. Those of us who didn't join, you can join later on. It can be peaceful and nothing will happen to you. But again, we must tell ourselves, what if the government had information beforehand that the rally was going to be monopolized by a certain sector of society? How would they have acted? Or maybe they are trying to show neighboring country how democratic we are. Because the neighboring country is also having an election now. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? Who said Singapore?
Mine is more of a comment. I don't know if you agree, but the primary cause of the big dissent is capital C, corruption, right? / cronyism. And then we have talked about an utterly corrupt leader. Then we said we don't want him just to step down. For a real solution, we want safeguards for the system to be put in place to prevent similar types. I think there is another dimension which I would like to see us talk more about, and that is ourselves. Working within our own sphere of influence, rather than our circle of concern, which is Najib and the system and everything else. We are not talking about us, which condones and allows corruption to happen, and we are part of the corrupt practices that enable these people to thrive so well. Yeah? Are we the Baba in the Alibaba equation? Are we buying stocks that of companies, listed companies they are giving generous donations to the ruling party to stay in power? Are we the first to pull out a $50 note if we are stopped by a policeman? Do we believe that money can buy everything and teach our children that that's the case? I think we should have this simultaneous dialogue and grassroots activity to ask ourselves to soul search that is allowing our country to be in this rotten state that it is in now.
Okay, my question or rather my comment is, I would like to bring you the Anwar factor. You know, if you look at the previous demonstration and the fear of the UMNO government, has always been Anwar. I think Anwar is the only one who is able to reform RC and all that, and you can see the violent retaliation from the police each time when Anwar is around, right? So in this case, Bersih 4, Anwar is safely behind bars, right? Of course, you know how and why and the corrupted court case and blah blah blah, right? You know about that, right? So, I want to ask your comment. How do you feel that Anwar factor has influenced the outcome of Bersih 4 now? Because if you look at Anwar's case, they really go all out to get Anwar. They want to kill him actually, you know? And I think that is very sad, you know? What Anwar has done before is another matter. But if you look at keadilan or justice, there's something, a big question now. So my question is based on that. Maybe you can add more if you know the background and what has happened. Right.
Thanks, Kate. Let's just capture those 4 questions. 5, is it? Sorry. But certainly the first one around issues of evolution versus revolution, but a different take on fundamental structural social cleavage in this society. That it's not the ethnic lenses that maybe are the most important, but if we talk about class or at least urban and rural dissension, I didn't know that your policy was to have cheaper cars. As a cyclist, I think that's a very, very, very regressive policy position. Extremely regressive. Cheaper petrol, totally unsustainable, has nothing to do with green, sustainable economy and so on. Out. Get out. You know he was a Mahathir boy in the late 90s. I would have loved to have met this guy in the late 90s as a Mahathir boy. That would be an interesting conversation. Yeah, we had a contribution about polite, clean, pick up the rubbish, occupy, and the forces in Hong Kong are still in power. Nothing absolutely has changed. In fact, one could argue that there's been a regression in that particular movement. So that goes back to the question of evolutionary versus revolutionary change and so on. And in particular political conjunctures, if you look back at the fall of Suharto, if you look back at the fall of Marcos and so on, very interesting constellation of forces come together. Partly in civil society and social movement, but there also has to be defection from the old ruling class. It's not maybe what we prefer. And is that in fact happening? Are there dissent? Is dissent? I'm talking to you two. You're like naughty students, aren't you? Sitting at the back of the class. No, there also is dissent within the ruling elite itself. Are we seeing that? Can that be captured? I mean, your big boss is talking, and you would never have thought this in any time in the last 20 years, of making a tactical alliance with Mahathir. I mean, this is astonishing, completely astonishing. Is that something to be welcomed? In fact, is that the only way you can make an initial tactical breakthrough, is indeed through these strange bedfellows, you know, strange people getting to bed with each other. Believe me, I know. Should we let them have some So I think they need to answer. He's studying the answer on page 56. Everything is on page 56.
It's actually page 53, but I don't want to refer this to her. Yeah, it's just too many thoughts being thrown around, but politics of identity, Malay, Chinese, Indian, I can actually do a real full session of this. Yeah, I don't mind. You know, I have come to think that, and it's not just because it's not easy to discard this and therefore we should do it, but I think it's too premature to just discount race. We cannot discount politics of identity. We cannot discount the identity of a person in that sense. Even looking at the rural-urban divide, looking at the latest statistics on poverty, the difference is stark. The majority race is still poor. And if we do not deal with the deeply entrenched inconfidence of the Malay society, it's difficult to go anywhere. This is deeply entrenched. And when I say deeply entrenched, I'm not talking about 58 years, 60 years of UMNO rule. I like what you say, you know, UMNO accentuate that, made it worse. It's actually a 200-year inculcation of insecurity in the Malay society. And I think to say suddenly now, hey, let's not talk about Malay, Chinese and Indian divide, let's talk about everything, let's talk about everyone as Malaysian, I think it's too simplistic. We can have a session on this after this. I'm writing actually an article on Melayu Yakin versus Melayu Takut, the two strands of Malay tradition, Malay psyche, the confident Malay and the fearful Malay, and I argue that political party today, Malay-based political party today, thrive on the fear of Malay, on the insecurity of the Malay. On one hand, they scare the Malay that Malays will lose their race, identity, position, etc. On the other hand, religion. So in this sort of dense discourse rhetorics, it's difficult to say, hey, let's just forget about all this and talk about being Malaysians. I think we have to deal with racial, or rather identity politics. There is a vacuum of leadership, Malay leadership, and I think post-Bersih, one of the key things is to address this vacuum. On one hand, are not in prison, on the other hand, past leaders who are now simply supporting Najib, even as people within UMNO themselves are suing Najib, going against Najib. So there is a vacuum. Whether GHB can fulfill this is yet to be seen, unfortunately. But for the GHB GHB has been capturing the attention of the traditional past supporters, evidenced by the rallies that they have been doing in Penang, in Perlis, and in Kedah. These are the places that I'm familiar with because I've been involved. You see the traditional past crowd coming out and cheering, not just coming out, cheering, listening to their ceramah. So, but whether they can provide that sort of credible leadership to fill the Malay leadership vacuum, that is yet to be seen. Anwar is not here, past the top leadership of past on here. But I like to point out that the current crop of GHB, especially the MPs, they are the best past MP ever had in this crop, in this current term, which says something about past today. All their best MPs in Parliament, best performing MP in Parliament, are out of past to join GHB. And so, dealing with the Malay leadership, okay, that is one. That is, for your information, that is being discussed at the leadership level of DAP, PKR, and GHB. Yes, Maria, it's really, I mean, I would not put it at such an individualistic or personal level, but yes, again, it is the whole system that we are in. It's not really about personal greed. A few days ago, I had a phone call from a woman in Bukit Mertajam, 3 years old, young woman, saying, you know, I'm in trouble, I have to go to the court because I stole something from the supermarket, about 200 ringgit. And I said, I can't help you, this is This is not a civil case. You can't settle it out of court. You have to go to the court because you have already you have already been summoned to the court. It's a criminal case. So, and she lamented, it's just 200 ringgit versus 2.6 billion. It's not funny, but what I'm trying to say is that we are living in a culture, in a society where it's not about individuals. Everybody has potential, is potentially a Najib. Even you, Gary. Everybody is potentially a Najib. Because the system is not in place. Because we are living in a world where, you know, I can settle it. Our court can settle it, the policeman can settle it, anyone. I can buy my way out, I can buy security, I can buy comfort, I can buy UPSR paper, I can buy grades for my children, I can buy accountability, I can buy support to the government, I can buy democracy. You mentioned dissent in the ruling party, which is really interesting. I'm just going to say 2 words and that's it. Nur Jazlan. Yeah? Yeah. But yes, Grand Coalition, it's a very interesting concept, and Kit Sian has been saying this even before the breakaway. I think it was in February or something like that, and Zaire and I have been talking about it, we've been reflecting, we wrote articles on this Grand Coalition. But the motivation is definitely different. For Mahathir, it's to save UMNO. But for Kit Sian, for DAP, the motivation is really to save Malaysia. And I was glad that during the parliament by the walkway, parliamentarians were meeting in parliament a month or 2 ago. We were not allowed to use the meeting room. We were in the walkway. Amiga said the same thing. You know, there is a need for a grand coalition to take over capital government at least a year, reform the system, ensure independence of key institutions, and then hand it over again for election. This is usually, I mean, this is not new historically. Many countries, especially when the country is facing crisis, politicians have to come together. And I think that there is a need to be, there is a need, of course, both sides, to be less partisan. And when I say that, people get angry because how can we sleep with UMNO? But you know, being in parliament, there were so many missed opportunities. And there was a very interesting law that was passed recently. In fact, it was not passed, it was rejected. It was a law to ban ketum. Ketum is a kind of traditional herb, intoxicating herb, found mainly in northern Malaysia, in kampungs, used by the Malay. So it's intoxicating. So minister tabled a paper to put it on the list of dangerous drug item. But after debate, both parties actually found common ground in the sense that it is disproportionate to put this herb in that list, and the bill was struck off. So I think there are many opportunities like this, not just limited to lists and yeah. So Parliament should be more, you know, how do you say that? More bipartisan, yes, more. I can't recall the word, but yeah, it should be more deliberative. People should come together really to talk about the interests of the country. Yeah, so.
Okay, to answer the evolutionary or revolutionary, that's a very dangerous answer. If I answer revolutionary, I might be summoned again for another round of police questioning. So, I think there's no guarantee whether be it evolutionary or revolutionary that will actually guarantee a structural change. But I think what I would like to highlight, I think most of you would know about the Guatemala Spring, as I termed it, Guatemala Spring, that is actually quite unexpected. So it could be more or less a revolutionary, although personally I think that it's not that possible to have a revolution in Malaysia, but I would just like to highlight that there's no guarantee on structural change because the past history has proved that, including the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos that time, you know, they have a revolution, people power, but that doesn't guarantee the structural change, and the economy will still suffer until today. So yeah, and And the final question about the Anwar factor. Sorry to say, but I think the Anwar factor is not a big influence anymore, especially in the Bersih 4. I did notice that because I think the Bersih 4 did mention that no political party slogans or banners allowed and things like that. But of course, political parties being political parties, I still saw several flags here and there, including there's one group of veteran activists. They call themselves Otai Reformasi. Otai means old timer, yes, means old timer. So there's about 20 of them, you know. They actually voice out saying that, but their shirt already show that they are, that's the Anwar factor on them. So, but there's one big giant banner that's released Anwar. That's the only one that I saw. So I would say that now people are moving into more civil society. The personality-driven words before this, but I didn't really see it in this time around.
We have probably 5 or 6 minutes left, and so I'd like to gather a last round of questions. Arifin, I'll come back to you, but you have had one bite of the cherry, so there are 2 people right at the front under my nose.
Thanks, Gareth. I just wanted to make an observation because it wasn't brought up. When Gareth referred to Singapore and Malaysia, and Thailand, Indonesia and Philippines, there are also the other parts of Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma. So when you talk about this constellation of forces, you must remember that in Thailand, Indonesia and Philippines, where the revolutions make a difference, among the one big factor in that constellation was the presence of the armed forces. And here in Singapore and Malaysia, probably because of the historical legacy, I think, but not discounting the possibility. A few years ago, there were intimations that sort of thing could happen. Just an observation.
Can I sit down? I'm sure. Okay. I think I want to respond to Mr. Singh, MP. I think perhaps you're a rare exception. I do have a dislike for revolutions. It's just like things you kind of death, Texas. Politicians. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. You said that which is an interesting criminological theory about we can all be a potential machine. And I suppose in short what I meant is, given the circumstances, we can all steal if we can get away with it. If we think we can get away with it. So addressing you as a politician, and there are many social prescriptions related to what happens after Bersih, what should we do, what kind of society we want. What guarantees you can give me as a politician that once you're in power, and history shows us, you're going to betray us. And you're going to turn, you're going to compromise, and you're young, you're dynamic, you come across as very genuine. But there are many seasoned politicians here who, I'm sure, history, look at the Labour Party now. And I support Corbyn, but still, don't let anyone tell me. Do you know what I mean? After Bersih and after the kind of social movements you talk about, and
they could be overlapping. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's give the voice back to the table. Iwi, you want to go first?
You first? You want to wrap up first? Oh, yeah.
This has become a DAP sort of committee.
But seriously, buying a book because I remember some time back when I was
Mahathir boy.
I was a newly convert ex-Mahathir boy. I was in a church, my friend invited me to the church, and then somebody was saying, Jesus is the answer. Then another guy, brilliant guy, who's not doing his PhD in Japan, Marxist. My God. He said, no, Jesus is the question. I think what we really need questions. And Ying Hooi's book invites us, draws us, and entices us to ask questions, sometimes difficult ones, which she herself admitted that there's no answer yet, but questions nonetheless. You know, I always, getting back to what Marian has said, individuals doing their part, we are all potential budget. I think one way, it's either me or you. Even if I elect you, you'll probably be a budget one day. So, no, but I'm going to give you the programs later, one or two. But you know, seriously, I always say this in a jest, but I think maybe it's time to take it seriously. Can we all pretend that justice exists? Can we all pretend that good exists? Can we all pretend that the election is not flawed and go out and bloody vote and invite others to vote? Can we pretend that, you know, if we really go through the system, you know, it's difficult. We are all tempted to buy our way through the system, but can we all pretend that the system will work and we have to insist that, hey, even naively, you should vote for me. The system should work for me, even naively. I think that is one, and that is very personal. Anyone can do it. Maria expressed that sentiment. Let's all pretend that goodness exists in this world. Human rights exist, and we have to demand human rights, regardless of the price. It's easier to buy our way through, but we have to press on. Is the system. At one level, individuals have to pretend, but on the other level, the system must be there. Systems such as, you know, our friend Surin, we have talked about an app, a smart app. This is a detailed example, but this is an example I think which is very useful. We have introduced an app 2 years or 3 years ago. My team has introduced an app which is now used throughout Penang. It's called the Citizen Action Technology, CAT, but it's not CAT in Penang, CAT. It allows people to lodge report on municipal complaints. Snap picture, tag the location, post it up. And all the complaints are posted online, free for all to see. So I was telling Surin, because Surin is an excellent citizen, is an exemplary citizen. He said, you know, I don't call my YB, thank God. These are not your job. But I call the local council. Sometimes they do, but you know, he had some praise for them. Sometimes they do, but sometimes it's very slow. So I said, that's because you're using the old system. The old system is not transparent. Only you know about your complaint, the council knows, God knows, I don't know. And you have to pursue it, it's fine. So we are giving you a tool to put all this online for everyone to see. And we are giving you the tool to actually lobby your friends, rally your friends against an issue. Things like this. You change the system by putting this guarantees of securities for transparency, for accountability, because don't ever trust any politicians. Things like giving you the money, you vote for the projects that you want to. And once I do that, I think once the people feel the real power in their hand, it's very difficult for me to withdraw this project. So this is what I'm trying to do. And I think this is what some of the many politicians, young politicians, especially in DAP, in PK, are trying to do. And I think we are not giving enough credit to local initiatives like this. We are obsessed with big names, the Najids, the Anwars, the Lims, or whatever. I think scope down, look at these little boys here and there, little girls, and encourage them, and press your MPs to do the same. Hey, why the bloody MP can do this? Why can't you do it as well? Why can't you take 20%? It was 25% of my annual allocation. Why can't you take 10%, just 10% to do it this year? Why can't you do this transparency thing that they are doing in Bukit Batajan or whatever? So I think at the end of the day, it's a system. Of course, anyone is, the takeaway lesson is anyone is a potential Najib. It is a system that it's not about Najib, it's not about Osmar really. It's about the system that allows them to get away. Thank you.
You agree?
Yes. Conclude, this is very simple and very cliche actually. I'm a believer of people power, and please believe that every single small little step that you're doing, because some people say that, oh, I'm doing this little, it's not going to make any changes, but when it's being joined together, it actually can make some changes. So please believe, because one thing, and there's one thing in Bersih that really touched me. I'm not sure if it is something that's new. I only found out about this after the Bersih event. There was actually this, you know, there's a lot of parents that were struggling that I want to attend the Bersih, but I have kids to take care of. I cannot leave my babies and things like that. So there was actually initiatives, you know, by this childcare center in KL. So they actually offer free of charge to take care of all the babies, the kids, you know, if the parents wanted to go for the Bersih rally. So I felt very touched myself because that's the dilemma of many parents, you know, they cannot leave their kids alone. So I think, you know, that little small step that, you know, people offering to help. So that is what makes us Malaysians.